Hi, I'm Ricky. I'm here at Bulldog Parks, and I'm with our very own Mr. Shaw, and we're talking about our map testing and our questions. What do we have to do to take the map test?
um, why do you have to take the MAP test? MAP test actually gives us a quantitative measure of student learning. So in other words, we can actually now track your learning through the school year. So in other words, if let's say you're a student, you score 210, but you have specific deficiencies in reading or reading comprehension or analysis or interpretation of text or different things such as that, we now have a diagnostic means or something that actually tells us these are the areas that you need to improve on. And so it's really a great tool to monitor and assist in the learning process.
What do you have to get to pass?
Well, there's really no passing per se, because again, the test itself is kind of diagnostic. So each student gets a score, and really we're looking to see if you are in a norm group, which simply means all the students, about 3 million students in the nation take the MAP test, and then there's a score generated based on the average performance of every sixth grader who took the test. So let's say that's 220, and then where do you fall on that 220, and then is your progress up from there?
How long does it take?
The test itself is an untimed test on average, and y'all might be able to tell me better. On average, about how long? On average, maybe half an hour or 45 minutes? Is that about right? Yeah, it seems about 45 minutes.
Does everybody have to take it?
Everybody does. I mean, it gives us a good understanding of the learning process of all of our students. And so we have them in our building, 6 through 8, they do. Now, once you get to high school, there is not a MAP test, and I think it goes down to third grade. Maybe it gets as low as first grade beginning this year, but I don't remember.
What do you do with the scores after you're done?
Your teachers will look at them, I'll look at them, I'll look at them as a process to understand your learning and a process to understand the teaching. So, for example, if one teacher has a bunch of kids who moved up and another teacher didn't, well, then we have a chance to sit down with that teacher and say, hey, is it the kids, is it you, is it a combination of both, what can we do better, etc., etc.
Um, why do you take it 3 times a year?
3 times a year is a decision that's made by our district, and one that I support in the fact that you have some baseline data. So as soon as you get off that long, horrible summer break, because we all know how bad that is, and you got to get the brain started up. So we got an idea of where it is, where you are, and then the way our school year is broken up, we're in two semesters. So really, the MAP test happens almost between the semesters, give or take a week or two. So then we get to track your learning through the first part. We start here, so we know where you start. You have that semester, then we MAP test again. How did you do here? And then anything that has to change in the learning process for you, or things we have to do better to let you know where you need to be. And then we go from here. We adjust it there, and then we have this final one. Our final one's coming up March 12th, and that gives us about 4 weeks to the remainder of the school year before PAC comes. So let's say whatever else we might have missed in those first two, that last measure will tell us if there's any critical pieces that we missed that we need to focus on.
How did the map test start?
MAP test started from an organization called NWEA, which stands for Northwestern, I think it's Northwestern Educational Association. Don't quote me on that.
Mm-hmm.
I can look it up for you. But and NWA is in a company that is into testing, and like I said, they generally test about 3 million children a year. So it's a pretty reliable predictor of performance. And they work real closely with each state to make sure they're aligned to their state standards.
What is the max of the questions? Like how many?
You know what? I don't know that answer. The max number of questions you can have on them, I don't know. Good question.
What are some of the subjects?
Subjects that they test right now are language usage, reading, mathematics, science, and there's some talk about the possibility of having social studies somewhere down the road.
What is this Lexile score means?
A Lexile score is a measure of a document's readability. So in other words, you take a document, you look at it, based on how hard it is, it gets a score, and that's where the Lexile score is generated. The readability, the higher the Lexile score, the more difficult the piece is to read. Obviously, the lower the score, the easier it is to read.
Thank you very much for letting us interview you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm done, and I'm Rickii, and this is Mrs. Shaw at Bulldog Parks.
Have a good day.
Hi, I'm Rickii. I'm here at our very own Ms. McCallister.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about map testing. Why do you have to take the map test?
Well, there are a lot of reasons why the map test is important. The map test gives us a prediction of how kids are going to do on the PAC test. This is really important. Well, the PAC test, okay, first of all, let me tell you that the map test stands for Measure of Academic Progress, okay? So it tells us how much progress you're making. The PAC test, that's the Palmetto Achievement Challenge test. That's a test that also tells us the same kind of information. So how you do on the map test gives us some indication of how you're going to do on your PAC test. PAC tests are really important for a lot of reasons. They affect our school report card, and they tell us what kinds of classes you might be prepared for next year. PAC test now is an indication of how you're going to do on another test you're going to take in high school called the HSAP. That stands for High School Assessment Program. The reason that that test is really important, which makes all these tests that predict it really important, is because in order for you to get a high school diploma in the state of South Carolina, you have to pass the HSAP. So we want to see how kids do on the PACT, also because it gives us an idea of whether they know what they need to know to pass the HSAP. The MAP tells us whether they know what they need to know to pass the PACT. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the reason why the MAP test is important. Another reason is because it tells us what kind of skills each individual student is strong in and which kinds of skills they might need extra help with. So it gives the teachers some ideas of how to help each individual student. That's really important. And the third reason why it's important is because we use it to figure out what kinds of classes you're ready to take. So how you do on the MAP test is going to help me to know what kind of math class I should put you in. That's really important. If kids blow off the MAP test, then they may end up in a class that's not going to challenge them as much as they should be challenged. So those are all reasons why MAP is really important. And we give it 3 times a year because that way we can measure how much progress you're making throughout the year. So we give it to you once in the fall, and that gives us an idea of where you were at the start. Then we give it to you in the winter so we can see how much knowledge you've gained, how much you've learned between the fall and like January, okay? Then we give it to you again in the spring so we can measure whether you're still making progress. And if there are kids that aren't making any progress, then we've got to figure out why, and we've got to figure out how to help them. So.
What do you have to get to pass it?
That's a really good question. There is no real passing grade to it. What we have with math is we call them percentiles. We look at how you're doing compared to how other kids are doing all over the nation on things, okay? So there isn't really a passing grade because this isn't really about you pass on to the next grade or not. It's more just to tell us how you're doing in each subject and where your strengths and weaknesses are. So there is no real passing grade. But we can tell you, well, if you get this score, then you're right in the middle of where all the other 6th graders in the country are. And if you get this score, then you're like way at the top. And if you get this score, then you're down further. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no real passing grade.
How long does it take?
Teach, and just to see whether it makes sense. You know, what kinds of things we're teaching or whether what we're doing is just really not working. So.
I got a question. Why do you take it 3 times a year?
So like I said a few minutes ago, because, and I don't know if you're taking a social studies math.
Thank you for letting us interview you on
My
math.
pleasure.
And I'm Rickii and it's McCallister at Bulldog Parks.